Hi, this is Steve Rigolosi, and today on Forgotten Mysteries, I have for you Frequent Flyer by Kinky Friedman. This is copyright 1989 by Morrow. So, if you have not heard of Kinky Friedman, you are in for something kind of wild and unexpected. So let me give you a little bit of background about Kinky, who sadly passed away just a couple of months ago here in 2024. And then I'll tell you about his books, and then I'll tell you about this specific installment, which is number 4 of the 18 mysteries that he wrote, all featuring a character by the name of Kinky Friedman. So Kinky Friedman's real name was Richard Friedman, and he got the nickname Kinky because he had that very curly Jewish hair. And someone started calling him Kinky when he was young, and the name just stuck with him. So that is how he is known professionally. He had a rather interesting life and rather storied career. He ran for government in Texas, where he, which was one of his homes. And in addition to being a novelist, he also was the lead singer in a band, Kinky Friedman and the Texas Jewboys. So, with a name like that, a band name, that can kind of give you a sense of what Kinky was all about. So the way his series got started, he does something interesting that I haven't seen done a lot, which is he takes his own real life and he fictionalizes it so that Kinky Friedman, the writer, and Kinky Friedman, the character in the book, are mostly the same person. And his friends in real life are his friends in the book. In later books, he starts to call his posse the Baker Street Irregulars, because they are, a very motley group. One is McGovern, who is a journalist. The other is another is Ratso, not a nickname you want to have, who is the editor of the National Lampoon and is known for wearing the most hideous clothes you can imagine, like a big pink puce suit or something that makes him look like a gigantic banana, and he wears a coonskin cap, and it's just kind of a wacky guy. And then there's his friend Steve Rambam, who is a real detective and who helps Kinky with his cases. Kinky, the character, is, he's the detective. He's the lead in these books. And he tends to solve the plot, such as they are, through a combination of instinct or hunch or gut. And he has his boys, his posse, especially Rambam, go out and gather the information for him. And they're always saving him from imminent death because Kinky is the ultimate wise guy. I mean, he just, he doesn't care who he's talking to. He's always cracking jokes. And people are constantly trying to kill him because they sense that he's getting too close to information and so forth, and to solving the crime. So, as I mentioned, Frequent Flyer is early in his series. He stopped writing the series in about 2005, and I don't know why that is. The later books get you can kind of sense that he was maybe losing a little bit of interest, and so maybe he just sort of said, okay, I got 18 books under my belt. I'm kind of done with this. It's time for me to retire. The earlier books have more plot to them. such as it is, whereas the later books are just a lot of wisecracking and philosophizing and not much mystery going on. But to even say that there's a lot of mystery in the early books, he was working harder to write more of a traditional mystery to be solved. But that kind of fell by the wayside. And believe me when I tell you, you don't read Kinky Friedman for the plots. You don't read him because you want an Agatha Christie type puzzle that you're going to solve with clues and, all those other tropes of the mystery genre. You read him for his voice. And this is where I have to stamp the most major warning on this book cover and any other book that you might want to read by Kinky Friedman, because the term politically correct never enters his vocabulary. He is politically incorrect. He is always making jokes about everybody and everything, from women who he calls broads to gay people to Asians who he calls Orientals. He's from a different era, and I think the best way I can describe him is you have to think of him as a stand-up comedian who's got his shtick, who's got his patter, and if you can kind of let loose some of your inhibitions, you'll find he can be quite funny. He can turn a phrase, and he's actually a very good writer. But if you're at all sensitive to these sorts of things, to making fun of large groups of people, which we don't do these days in print, you'll be, excuse me, you'll be in for a good time reading Kinky Friedman, as long as you don't expect a plot. In other words, set your expectations accordingly, sit back, read for a chuckle or two, and you'll read you'll finish the book in a couple of days. Something I find interesting is I'm kind of interested, as a reader and as an editor, in this phenomenon of really short chapters. Nowadays, this is kind of what sells, I believe, part of what sells James Patterson is those 2-page chapters that just keep you, running frantically through the book. But, let's face it, he wasn't the first to do that. I think the first writer I ever encountered who did that was Mary Higgins Clark. And I remember noticing at that time, wow, 1-page chapters, 2-page chapters, it boggled my mind because, we're all used to 10, 15, 20-page chapters, a minimum of 5 or 6 pages. But Mary Higgins Clark really got that formula down for the short chapters. And then I even was at a convention once where Mary Jane Clark, Mary Higgins Clark's ex-daughter-in-law, she was talking about her work, and I'll never forget this, she specifically mentioned nice short chapters as one of the reasons why people would enjoy reading her books. So I guess this is something that people really like. I like it myself once in a while. They do make you kind of run wildly through the book. This particular book, which is about 180 pages, has 70 chapters. So you can tell they are, they are quite short, maybe, typical length, 2.5 pages. And I just kind of have the sense, I have no basis for thinking this other than a hunch, that probably Kinky sat down and wrote 1 chapter a day. And after 70 days, he had a book that he sent in to his agent and his editor, and they just sort of said, okay, it's a wrap. because, like I said, there's not. Kinky wasn't overly concerned with plot or character development. He's good with setting. You know, the books are set in New York City, although he sometimes takes a field trip elsewhere. And he's quite good at the New York scene. His character lives on Van Dam Street, which is, you know, downtown. And it seems to be the garbage truck capital of New York City. I don't know if there's a city garbage truck station on Van Dam Street, but that's where he lives, in a loft. And there are some fun things about that he, you know, it's the days before, you know, fancy schmancy buildings and, you know, buzzers and all those other kind of things. So he keeps a puppet head on the top of his refrigerator with a key in its mouth. And so when people come to visit him, oh, and the puppet head has one of those like parachute type things attached to it. So when someone wants to visit Kinky, they sort of scream up at the window. He opens the window and he throws down the puppet head with the key in its mouth. And it sort of floats down, and his visitor uses the key to get in the door and come up to visit him. So that's one fun thing. And, you know, there are other things too. He has a cat, unnamed. The cat is never named in any of the 18 books. That is, you know, they coexist, and the cat is very imperious, as cats tend to be. And Kinky sort of admires the cat for not really caring what anybody else thinks or wants, and just, you know, living its life as queen of the domain, because it is a female cat. And another funny thing is, and this is in pretty much all of the books, that just above him, occupying the floor above Kinky in the flat, is a woman named Winnie Katz, who runs a lesbian dance class. And this is a source of much fun and fun making throughout the books. I mean, it is a love-hate relationship in that Kinky kind of likes Winnie, and she doesn't like him because he's a wise guy. You know, he's always teasing her, and you know, he does crazy things over the course of the series. Like he taps her shrink's office while she's in there, you know, having her therapy, and he breaks into her apartment. And I mean, there's no reason. It's totally understandable why she can't stand him. And as the series progresses, she becomes less and less patient with him, and the relationship actually takes a very dark turn later in the book. But early in this book now, she's sort of still tolerating him. But there's just something hilarious about that idea of the lesbian dance class. What does it look like? What does it mean? You know, I don't know. But it's a thing in this book, and it's exactly the kind of thing that Kinky tends to have a lot of fun with. The plot, and before I get into the plot, I should say I haven't really been able to make sense of the title Frequent Flyer, except that it has really nothing to do with flying on an airplane so much as the fact that Kinky is frequently drunk or high. In this book, he does a lot more drinking. In later books, he's also quite indulgent in various drugs. So that could be, you know, what he's referring to here, that he's sort of flying high in one way. But ironically, he's also sort of a depressive guy. And that's where the philosophy of Kinky comes out. He's rather a lonely man deep down, and somewhat isolated, and you know, trying to make connections, and has plenty of friends, but always feels somewhat alone. And his friends make these cameos in the books, and so you could tell the real Kinky, did have a lot of friends. One of his books has a plot that really revolves around Willie Nelson, and on the back of the book, there's a photo of Kinky and Willie. They were good friends in real life, and in this book, he gets a call from the West Coast from a man named Kent. I can't remember his last name. And he just casually drops, oh, he's Ruth Buzzy's husband. Ruth Buzzy as in, from Laugh-In back in the day. And I thought, oh, come on, he's got to be putting me on. So I run to Wikipedia, and sure enough, Kent is indeed Ruth Buzzy's husband. Unfortunately, Ruth herself does not make an appearance in this book, although I wish she would, because I'd love to see her just pummeling the crap out of Kinky with her purse, which was, Ruth Buzzy's shtick back in the day. So he's always dropping names of these people who are his friends, and that's part of the fun of the book, right? He's fictionalized his life, and think about the fun we all could have if we fictionalized our lives and made them much more entertaining than they really are. The plot in this book is based on Kinky's real life, that he had been a volunteer in the Peace Corps in Borneo. And as this book starts, a friend of his from his days in the Peace Corps has died, and Kinky is invited to his wake, his funeral in Cleveland. Kinky goes out because he was very fond of the guy, and it's an open casket, and he realizes that the man in the casket is not his friend. He's just, he's unknown, and Kinky's like, well, I've got to get to the bottom of this. And he begins this investigation with the help of his friends that lead to, I'll just come right out and say it, a Nazi plot, and other things related to the Nazis. I can't give away too much. And, I close this book, and I often have this experience when I finish reading a Kinky Friedman book. I close my eyes and I think really hard. I try to arrange in my mind my neurons so that I can see how he has developed his plot, the linkages that have been made. And these links always break down, right? Because he just was not a careful plotter. But that's okay. Like I said, because if you enjoy reading Kinky Friedman, you don't read for the plot. And I think I realized that rather early. I always guffaw at least a couple times in these books, in Kinky's books, and that was certainly the case here. But like I said, you have to have a thick skin for this kind of pushing the envelope humor. If you don't, I would say run, run away, because you will be so offended, you will be speechless at some of the things that drop from his mouth. If you can take it, I think you'll see that he's got this philosophical way of writing, and his turns of phrase. He was a good writer, and you always get a little bit of insight into humanity or the human condition. I mean, nothing epic, nothing that's going to start a religion, although I'm sure Kinky would not have minded that. But just these, little bits of humanity that are that make you stop and take pause. And then the book is over, and we get ready for the next installment. And I have to wonder, since he stopped writing these books in 2005, I can't quite, you get older and you don't have the memory you once had, but, by the early 21st century, I think we in the publishing industry were becoming much more attuned to language and the sorts of things that Kinky used to get away with, no one can get away with nowadays. And, was part of his giving up the series the fact that maybe he had pressure from an agent or an editor to clean himself up and not be himself. And maybe he said, no, I am Kinky Friedman. This is how I write. And if you don't like it, go shove it up your rear end. I don't know. I don't know if that is really what happened, but, I could see it as a possibility, fun to speculate. So that's what I've got for you. If this sounds at all intriguing, I would say pick up a Kinky Friedman. You can read them in any order, really. The order doesn't matter. He develops his own vocabulary throughout the books, and so some of his phrases that I love from later books haven't yet been developed in here. So, for example, when somebody dies, he says that so-and-so stepped on a rainbow. That's a kind of nice way of describing someone dying. Or I warn you, this is a bit scatological. When he talks about someone doing number 2, he refers to them as taking a Nixon. And, just these other phrases that, are colorful and memorable and are sort of part of the Kinky experience. So I started with a book called Armadillos and Old Lace because I had been in the play Arsenic and Old Lace back in high school, and I thought, oh, this sounds like a fun take. And the book was like nothing I had ever read before, and I kind of fell under Kinky's spell, and I like him even while I realize that I shouldn't be laughing at the jokes that he's made. I have to wonder why he didn't try stand-up comedy, because that really feels like it would have been his milieu. But he put it down in, about 18 books about the character of Kinky Friedman. So with that said, give him a try or not, depending on your taste. I say rest in peace, Kinky. You were a unique individual. You've given me some really enjoyable and fun reading over the years. I hope you find happiness and peace wherever you are, because I know you were a little sad in real life. So I hope you're in a better place. Okay, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.